following is a work of fiction and should not be taken as actual history.
Meet Professor Roger Hill, historian, adventurer, and raconteur extraordinaire. He travels to parallel worlds where history went differently and brings back lectures on his findings. So grab a prime seat, pay attention, and take good notes. This is Alternate History 100. Welcome to the class.
Good morning. Someone once said that the only performer who ever affected history was John Wilkes Booth. I know, right? I think that statement reflects a snobbish view of history. An academic, look-down-the-nose opinion that TV, movies, and music are somehow not important. It's a very mistaken view. Just about anyone born in the last 100 years was influenced in some way by pop culture. And some were influenced on a major level. I mean, tell me that the guy who invented the flip phone, ask your parents about that, never watched Star Trek. Now, the point of divergence from my latest alternate world happened on February 3rd, 1959. Anybody know the significance of that date? I didn't think you would, but your grandparents would know it, because that was the day the music died. Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper. 3 major rock and roll acts, and they were in the middle of a tour in the Midwestern states. It was a brutally cold winter, and Buddy wasn't feeling well, and he was tired of rattling around in a crappy, poorly heated bus. So he chartered a small plane to take him and the other singers to their next gig. And that plane went down shortly after takeoff, killing all 3 of them. But what if that plane had not gone down? What if this was not the day the music died? Let's talk about how that worked out in the parallel world. We'll start with J.P. Richardson, a.k.a. the Big Bopper. He was a DJ from Beaumont, Texas, who had managed to get a couple of hit records. He was essentially a novelty act, doing comedy songs that fit in well with the radio landscape of the late 50s. In our world, he died at the peak of his fame. In that world, he lived and faded from the charts. Or did he? At 28, he was the oldest of the 3 stars and smart enough to know that he wouldn't have a long run doing what he was doing. He finished the tour, had 1 more single, and went home to be with his family, resume his radio career, and fulfill his dream of building his own recording studio. He was an innovative fellow. In both our world and theirs, he is credited with making the first ever music video. And once his studio was up and running, he founded his own record label. There, Richardson wrote and performed the kind of material that he wanted to do, and not what others told him to do. His success in this was moderate, but he made a living doing something that he loved. Eventually, he drew in other artists, primarily for the country charts. Several of these were people who never found success in our world, but who became stars over there. And Richardson gave them complete creative control of their work. In this way, he was a Southern Frank Sinatra who also gave control to the artists on his label, Reprise Records. But unlike Sinatra, Richardson never sold his label to a larger company. He just kept making records and working in radio until the day he died. At 17, Ritchie Valens was the youngest of the 3 stars killed in the crash. But in that world, he hung around for a few more years, charting 6 more hit singles that fit in well with the sound of the early 60s. But as much as he loved music, he hated the travel, especially the flying. So after a 1961 appearance on American Bandstand, he went home to Los Angeles on a train and settled down. But like Richardson, it wasn't the end for him. He found steady work as a session musician on the burgeoning LA music scene and became a beloved mentor to a number of Latino artists in Southern California. And that leaves Buddy Holly. Music historians in our world have speculated for years on what he might have done had he not died so young. He did, after all, record about 50 songs before he left us. How much more would he have done had he not died at 22? And I want you to let that sink in. 22. Not much older than you. Well, that world gives us an answer. Buddy charted 15 more songs in 1959, 1960, and 1961. But, like Valens, he grew weary of the road. The touring was straining his marriage, and the thrill of playing before a live audience was wearing thin. But what else could he do? Certainly not fade away. Nothing. Your grandparents would have gotten that joke. Well, unlike most performers of the day, Holly was not just a singer. He was also a gifted writer, composer, and producer. Most of his records were his own compositions, and he introduced production techniques the like of which rock and roll had never seen. If he didn't want to tour, he could always take his genius into the studio. And that he did, settling into a New York apartment, writing, composing, and producing songs for other people from 1962 onwards. Across the Atlantic, something new was happening. 4 mop-top lads from Liverpool were tearing up the UK charts. Beatlemania was on. And when the Beatles came to America in 1964 to appear on The Ed Sullivan Show, they simply had to meet Buddy. He was their hero. His band, the Crickets, was the very inspiration for the Beatles' name. His song, That'll Be the Day, was the first thing John Lennon ever recorded with his band, the Quarrymen. Now, in our world, the Beatles met with Elvis Presley, and there weren't any sparks. But over there, the meeting with Holly went really well. The Beatles came away thrilled having met their idol, and Buddy was inspired to go back in the studio and record some new songs of his own. Unfortunately, the good people in New York did not share Buddy's enthusiasm. They saw him as yesterday's man. They patted him on the head like he was a good doggy and told him to go back to producing. So what could he do? Hello, baby. He called J.P. Richardson, got on a plane to Texas, and recorded his songs there. And one of them, Broken Promises, went on to be one of the top 10 songs of that world's 1964. The success reignited Buddy's passion for performing. He had 4 more hits in 1964 and 65, and accomplished that without any touring, using only the Ed Sullivan Show as his live venue. The Beatles came back to North America in the summer of 65, playing 16 shows in 16 days. Holly had some FaceTime with the boys, and they got inside each other's heads. The Beatles saw how well Holly was doing without the hassle of touring, and began to think that maybe they could follow in his footsteps. And Holly came to see that the future of the business might lie not in singles, but in albums. Both acts went home to work on new projects. The Beatles made their iconic Rubber Soul album, and Buddy came out with his No Strings album, which he launched with a self-financed television special in December 1965. Both albums sold well during that Christmas season, and both garnered praise from the critics for their innovation. Now, I've got to say, you've been quieter today than in any class we've ever had. You're looking at me with these long, unblinking faces. It's like I'm lecturing the statues on Easter Island. Thank you. I realize that I'm talking about performers that you don't listen to and you might not be that familiar with. But I think that this particular parallel world is a test of the great man theory. Oh, they had the same presidents, the same wars, the same economy as we did. But I'd like to think that over there's some couple who bonded over Buddy Holly's 1965 No Strings album, and they had a baby born in 1968, and that baby had a baby born in 1998, and that baby who doesn't exist in our world will grow up to be president in 2052. I can't prove that, but I know that pop culture does matter in ways both big and small. And that leads to your assignment. This one is simple. Write a 600-word personal essay on how a piece of music, any music, has influenced your life. Maybe a song got you through a breakup, made you happy when you were sad, inspired you to do something. Doesn't matter. There is some song in each of your lives that did that. And as you write about that song, I want you to think about how the continued lives of Holly, Valens, and Richardson must have had an impact in that world, even if it isn't terribly visible. That's 600 words, due next class. Class dismissed. Hi, I'm Gary Wheeler. Alternate History 100 is a labor of love with the twin goals of entertaining you and making you think. If you like what you heard today, please hit the subscribe button, give us a like, and tell your friends about us. Your word of mouth can really help this channel grow. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Until then, keep thinking and make some history of your own.
The preceding was a work of fiction and should not be taken as actual history.